perhaps we have Mbak Cookie here. Mbak Cookie Suyahmun. Maybe not. If yes, hi Mbak. Thank you for getting me into moderating this webinar just like a few days ago. And our goal today is to share knowledge and insights on climate transitions and their impacts in Asia. So we hope that this discussion can help inform how climate-related risks, especially related to loss and damage, are understood, integrated, and addressed in national planning and development. Ladies and gentlemen, let me briefly introduce our three distinguished speakers that are joining us today. First, Dr. Ardasena Sopaheluakan, Vice President of Service Commission at WMO and Deputy Head of Climatology at BMKG Indonesia. Halo Bapak Sena, apa kabar?
Baik, kalau Mbak Lia.
And then the second one, we have Mr. Matthias Soderberg, Global Climate Lead at Danchurch Aid, Denmark. Hai, Bapak Matthias. Apa kabar?
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. And the third one, Mr. Muhammad Syamsudoha or Pak Doha, Chief Executive of the Center for Participatory Research and Development, CPRD from Bangladesh. Hai, Pak Doha.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And
And good
so
afternoon from Dhaka. Yes.
yeah. So we're from many regions, yeah. And the organizers informed me that we have participants from all over the world, from Ireland, from Bangladesh, from Indonesia, of course, the Philippines, and many other countries. And you guys are coming from many organizations, government, NGOs, think tank, private sectors, UN organizations. So we have a variety of audience with us today. And also, if the participants can check the chat column, the organizer have sent some links for presence, yeah, so that you can register and get your email noted so that later you will receive the presentation materials from the speakers. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin our first presentation by Bapak Dr. Ardasena Sopahiluakan. Um, Bapak Sena is from Indonesia's Meteorology, Climatology, Geophysics Agency, or BMKG. And Dr. Sena is a leading climate modeler and mathematician who has helped shape BMKG's climate services. He will give us an overview of recent climate trends and extreme weather events in Asia and what they mean for our development and resilience planning. Pak Sena, you will have 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation, and I will provide you with a reminder 2 minutes before it ends. Okay, Pak Sena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mbak Lia. Good afternoon, good morning to participants, also colleagues, speakers uh, from abroad, Matthias and Doha. Thank you very much for the kind invitation by IRID and also the other co-host inviting me on behalf of BMKG to provide the latest climate findings in the world, but as well as in Asia, and maybe a little bit how we can integrate that to better national planning. So let me try to share my screen. Yeah, just a second. Okay, I hope it's okay now. Yeah, so I will be mainly presenting the state of the climate of the world as well as Asia and how we can use that for the integration of science and services to support climate policy. So mainly the work that will be presented here has been carried out under the umbrella of the World Meteorological Organization, Under the organization, there is actually two intergovernmental technical commission, the Infrastructure Commission and the Services Commission, where I am. And under the Services Commission, there is a standing committee on climate services, which coordinate the assessment of the state of the global climate, and they publish annually the annual flagship publication for the state of the global climate, as well as the state of the greenhouse gases. That is most of the time or often referred to in the discussion of the UNFCCC mechanism, and also in many other policy discussion throughout the world. And they just published the edition for 2024, which I will highlight a few of their key findings. But also, I find it perhaps it's interesting for participants in this webinar to know we have also a version for the region in Southeast Asia and West Pacific. So we call this as Southwest Pacific. It's a more detailed analysis of the recent climate state in the region of Southeast Asia as well as West Pacific. So let's see what's inside of the recent publication, State of the Global Climate 2024. So we usually organize the findings in terms of key headline climate indicators. There are 5 climate headline indicators. It all started from the atmospheric composition. As we know, climate change is caused by global warming due to the increase of greenhouse gas. So we have to monitor the atmospheric composition from time to time. And this change of the composition of the atmosphere will, of course, impact the temperature and energy balance of the world. So that's why we monitor sea surface temperature as well as the surface temperature over land. And the temperature and energy imbalance will further impact the hydrological cycle. We have experienced changing in rainfall patterns. We also experience a sea level rise as well as acidification, and also importantly, the change of cryosphere in the forms of changes of ice cover. So how do we in the world monitor the greenhouse gas? There is exactly actually 30 global atmospheric watch stations throughout the world that monitors far from sources the greenhouse gas. And one of them is located in Indonesia, noted here in Bukit Kototabang. It's a really world-class station. So I would like to invite any one of you who are interested to see our measurements that are being taken there. So it has been 30 or actually 29 COP meetings, UNFCCC meetings, but we see this continuous increase of greenhouse gas. Despite we have the first COP in Rio, we have 97, we have the Kyoto Protocol, and 2015 we have the Paris Agreement, but yet we see a continuous increase of greenhouse gas concentration. And we know that the climate and its impact that cause disasters, etc., actually does not respond to the commitment of greenhouse gas reduction, but rather they respond to the greenhouse gas concentration. So this is actually quite alarming. And what do we find in 2024? All species of greenhouse gas that are being monitored is continuously increased. And some of the key highlights here, for instance, by the end of 2024, the concentration of greenhouse gas in the world averagely is already 420 parts per million, or ppm we call it, has increased from around 270 in the 1750s. So it's an increase of around 50%. What does 400 ppm means? It means we are talking about an amount of only 0.04% of the volume of our atmosphere. So that is very, very small amount of gas that we monitor. And yet that very small concentration can have a lot of consequences to our livelihood in the world. If I go back a few years from the present time, this is what the best science say in 2021. IPCC says that at the current rate, at the time of 2021, uh, with the rate of the warming of the world, it will reach 1.5 degree between 2032 and 2050. But to our surprise, actually, last year in 2024, we have surpassed for the first time the 1.5 degree limit that we all together agree in under the Paris Agreement. And 2024 was 1.55 degrees above the pre-industrial average. So does that mean that we surpassed the Paris Agreement? No, actually, because usually we define global warming in terms of 20-year average relative to the average period of 1850 to 1900. But yet, if we use that definition, we may have a 10-year delay in recognizing or reacting to exceedance of long-term temperature goal. So if we look at the trend of the temperature, even though we may say that, okay, we have not actually surpassed the Paris Agreement, but if you look at the trend, it's never, the trend is always increasing. So we are just actually in the boundary of actually surpassing the long-term average of 1.5 degree. Other signs of the alarming sign of climate change, the Arctic and Antarctic sea ice exchange in 2024 are well far below average, and also the coverage of the glacier cumulative mass balance in 2024 was lowest on record. We also noted that the ocean heat content was highest on record. You can imagine, for instance, in 1 year, the ocean absorbed around 18 times of the world total energy consumed in 1 year. So there's this abundant amount of energy that is actually absorbed by the Earth, especially by the ocean, and that is accelerated because of the greenhouse gas effect. Also quite concerning is the ocean acidification. Around 25% of the annual emission is being absorbed by the ocean. It is not the good news. The ocean becomes more acidic, and that is dangerous for the livelihood in the sea. Also, sea level rise is increasing. The trend is not linear. We experience a double in the rate of the sea level rise between the early 1990s and the recent years. So if we can go now to our region in most of us are in Southeast Asia. So we look at what happens in Southeast Asia. BMKG, for instance, monitor the greenhouse gas as also elsewhere in the world. The measurement of the greenhouse gas is continuously increasing of the same rate, around 2 ppm per year. Last year in Southeast Asia and West Pacific, also 2024 was warmest year on record, and that is actually not surprising. In terms of precipitation, there was a mixed signal of above average rainfall in the maritime continent region, with also some significant deficit signs in the Australian and New Zealand region. In terms of cryosphere, the Puncak Jaya glacier in West Papua will disappear in a few years' time, perhaps in the coming year or in the coming 2 years. And BMKG actually monitors this with a stockpile that is being installed since 2010. Our region is dominated by sea, so let us look at the sea. Sea surface temperature in the region continued to warm. The annual average of the SST in 2024 was highest on record. And also there is an impact in sea level rise. The rate of increase of sea level rise is actually quite uh, homogeneous or uniform in the region of about 3.9 or around 4 millimeters a year. Also quite alarming is the increasing occurrence of marine heat waves. So what is marine heat waves is actually an extended period uh, of exceeding a certain threshold that is defined by the 90th percentile or quite a warm region, quite a warm temperature. And this is actually quite serious to have a consequence for marine life and also dependent communities, for instance, in the coastal communities. If you are interested to have an in-depth analysis of the national climate, we will launch around the 21st of July the National State of the Climate in Indonesia. So you should keep an eye for the announcement through our social media at InfoBMKG. So the bad news of the climate has caused so many impact and disasters. The WMO noted, for instance, in 2023 that the impacts was quite severe. Most notably are floods in the region in terms of reported cases as well as death, as well as people affected and economic damage. If we delve a little bit deeper in Indonesia, for instance, there is an interesting asymmetry in hydromet disasters as well as geodisasters. Typically, geophysical disasters impact more lives compared to hydrometeorological disasters. But if you look at the impact in the economic scale, is 1 to 2 orders magnitude higher compared to disasters that are related with earthquake and tsunami. So, how do we strengthen preparedness towards climate risk? I think, or we think that climate change or adaptation is important. The three-legged stool of policy, science, and services is always important. So, if we want to have good policy, we have to have a good science foundation. We also have a good services that is supporting the policy implementation. And nationally, the policy is coordinated by the Ministry of Environment, the science through IPCC, and services through BMKG, in this case, under the World Meteorological Organization. We have had an experience, for instance, of providing science basis for the National Adaptation Plan, and that feeds into our national so the science basis feed into the strategy defined for several key priority sectors for the National Adaptation Plan, the water sector, food security, health, as well as coastal and the ocean. So a few examples, for instance, how do we in BMKG support this? We have several key areas that we supported with climate services. So, for instance, for agriculture or food security, we have a suite of information that is actually readily available and already suited to support from action to response all the way up to long-term policy. There is associated product that is or information that is actually suitable to tailor or to serve action purposes, design and preparedness purposes, as well as medium-term planning, and all the way up to long-term policy. Another example, for instance, for supporting energy transition or renewable energy, we have a suite of information that is actually already tailored to support the energy supply chains, We have historical climate observation that can be used for planning renewable energy purposes, for instance, solar radiation, and a suite of information from 10 minutes resolution up to projection timescale that can support the energy supply chain for renewable
Yeah.
energy.
Pak Sena, you
Yeah,
have 2 more minutes, yeah?
okay.
Okay.
Good. A real example of climate science that is translated into design and practice is the following one. For instance, we have a new information services that actually is supporting the efforts to design green building. So we have a certain climate zonation to support in the design of green building. So if one entity would like to design a low carbon house or a low carbon uh, building using passive cooling, in each region of Indonesia, there is a different type of cooling that is actually appropriate. So whether it is evaporative cooling, nighttime ventilation, or comfort ventilation. And a real example, for instance, is shown in the following slide. This is a collaboration between the Ministry of Public Works and BMKG. So they use that climate zonation, they use the long-term data. It feeds into the computational fluid dynamics for the design of the building, and eventually using a standard material, but the building is designed in such a way that is low energy in use. So the building is cooler during daytime of almost 3 degrees during daytime. So that is actually quite significant. And also during nighttime is 4.7 degrees cooler compared to outside. And if you see, the building is just like a regular apartment. It's located in Tegal, near the coast, which we know is quite warm. But if you see, the building is quite slanted oriented compared to the other buildings in the back. Is actually to capture the prevailing wind coming from the sea, to capture the morning cold breeze, and then it is trapped during daytime, so it prevents a warm air during midday uh, entering the building, and that makes the building quite cooler during daytime and nighttime. So I would like to close perhaps by a few closing remarks, which is actually not really spectacular, but we all already know that the greenhouse gas emission continues. Climate change is not decelerating, and quite worryingly, many Earth system tipping points will occur actually quite soon. So we humans are experimenting with the environment and the climate on a global scale. So we are heading into an uncharted territory. So immediate mitigation is actually not an option of when and how. We actually know already how the formula how to do that. And adaptation should be supported by science and climate services. I think it's already past the time that we actually have to implement this uh, uh, quite soon or starting from now. Thank you very much. I return the floor back to Valia.
Thank you so much, Pak Sena. That's a really great presentation. A lot of information right there, very compact. And don't worry, Bapak Ibu, if you register or like what do you call it? Put it your email there. The organizer will send you the PowerPoints because it's a really compact information. Yeah, thank you, Pak Sena. That's a really good starting point for our discussion today. And I would encourage Bapak Ibu, the audience, to write your questions in the chat box. So you can start writing it now. And then later, the organizer will select some of the questions that are relevant for our discussions. So please don't hesitate. Just write it, whatever you have in your mind, whatever questions you have in your mind. And there's also unlimited numbers for each participants to ask questions. So feel free to write it down now. And for the second speaker, we have Bapak Matthias Soderberg. So he is the global climate lead at Dan Church Aid in Denmark and the co-chair of the climate justice group at ACT Alliance. And Matthias has played a central role in climate negotiations and developed the loss and damage marker. What is that? Right? A tool to help track and define interventions related to climate impacts. And, he will explain that later. Also share practical applications of the loss and damage marker and how it has helped inform finance and national planning based on Dunchurch's AIDS fields experience. After this, Matthias cannot stay until the end. So after this, we will have a mini question and answer. So if you have any questions to Matthias, just write it down while in the middle of presentation. That's fine. And probably later I will invite Doha as well, perhaps, to give some comments later before Matthias leave the venue. All right, Matthias, the floor is yours.
And thank you very much for inviting me to this important webinar. I will also share a PowerPoint. I hope it can be seen on the screen now. And
yes.
To begin with, I'm coming, as was mentioned, from Dan Church Aid, a development NGO, and our work is on the ground. We are addressing the effects of climate change together with our partners on the ground, and this is also what is feeding into our advocacy work and our policy discussions. We are working in many different countries, including Cambodia and Nepal in Asia, and also a number of countries in the Middle East and Africa. Yeah, I'll just dive into it directly. I think we have a very, very good background now from Ardasena, who really set the scene, and we understand how urgent it is to address climate change. What we have done is to look more into loss and damage. Of course, when we talk about loss and damage, that's the effects which cannot be mitigated or adapted. When there are limits to adaptation, people and communities will face loss and damage due to the effects of climate change. And for us as a humanitarian NGO, we are of course responding to these effects. And we have tried to learn more about how to do this in a more focused manner. And this is why we have developed this marker for how to track loss and damage. And the reality is that even if loss and damage is discussed a lot in the UN climate talks, and it's a concept which is acknowledged, there is no international agreement about a separate category for loss and damage. This is a political discussion, but for us, it's also important to remember that it's not just about politics, it's also about action on the ground. So we needed a marker because we need to track the efforts of responding to the effects of climate change. It's because of the humanitarian need, but it's also because we want to improve our reporting so that we actually become more accurate in our reports. And maybe most important, we want to learn and improve the way we are addressing climate change. As a humanitarian NGO, we've been responding to disasters for many, many years. But as you will see with this presentation, loss and damage is a bit more complex. It's not just about addressing the immediate need. It's also about addressing other aspects which are coming because of climate change. If we look on the international discussions about climate finance, as you may know, parties in the UNFCCC have agreed that the developed countries should mobilize funding for the countries in the global south. But this funding is supposed to go to mitigation and adaptation. Loss and damage has still no formal, there's no formal commitments. And in reality, a lot of efforts to address loss and damage is actually reported as adaptation. This is problematic because it means that the real money going to adaptation to help us to adapt to the effects of climate change may be smaller than we think, because some of the money are actually used for loss and damage. At the same time, there are many activities related to loss and damage which are not covered in the current reporting of climate finance. Actually, they are not covered at all because some of the loss and damage activities are not monitored through other systems. And this is where it becomes so important to have this marker so that you can find the projects and learn from them. And this is, for example, when we talk about non-economic losses and slow onset disasters, which are not really captured with the existing monitoring systems which are used for development and humanitarian aid. Our marker is supplementing the existing markers for mitigation and adaptation. The reality is that the OECD there are these RIO markers, they are called, which are developed to monitor mitigation action and adaptation action. And then based on the same logic, we have created this loss and damage marker to monitor our own portfolio of projects. And it's very similar to the OECD RIO markers for mitigation and adaptation, but now also cover loss and damage. And with this marker, we will catch the extreme events, both rapid onset disasters and slow onset disasters. We will capture both economic and non-economic losses and damages. And we will also capture related effects like displacement and migration. The difference between adaptation and loss and damage in our interpretation with this marker is that adaptation is
Permisi, Bapak, boleh di-mute dulu? Mungkin panitianya bisa bantu? Thanks. Okay, Matthias, you can continue. Sorry for that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Can you repeat
Okay, perfect.
last 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. So adaptation, that's the activities which are happening before an event happens. Adaptation, as Adasena also mentioned, these are the efforts we can invest in to make sure we can live with the effects of climate change. We can make the houses cooler, for example, when there are heat waves. These are really important, but there are limits to adaptation, both because there may not be funding enough for the adaptation measures, but also because there are some events which are so disastrous, so they will affect communities, even if we had tried to adapt. So our loss and damage marker will catch the activities which are happening during and after the events. But then, in our loss and damage projects, we're not just trying to rebuild or build back better, or to build back. We want to build back better. And that's why many loss and damage projects actually are combined with adaptation, because instead of just helping people to resettle after flooding, for example, we try to make sure that they resettle and rebuild, and that they rebuild in a way which is adapted so that they can be more protected the next time there is a climate-related disaster. Yes. Oh. The kind of events this marker is catching, that's a lot of climate-related events, which Adasena also mentioned: cyclones, typhoons, sea level rise, heat waves. We are not considering earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, which are not linked to the climate debate. it's not always as easy to make the attribution. And we try to rely on science. We try to monitor what science and WMO and others are saying about climate change so that we capture the right activities. Looking at our portfolio, we can see that loss and damage related activities are increasing. It's around 16% of our projects or the projects we support are right now linked to loss and damage. This is not just because the need for loss and damage is increasing, it's also because we are learning and we are becoming better in addressing loss and damage. And therefore, we also manage to spend more money on it. So this image is not should not be it's not the only way to look at it. But that we learn more is also important because we need to improve our way of addressing loss and damage. It's not just getting the statistics from the marker. We're also making deep dive studies, case studies, to learn more about the effects on the ground, where we speak with the communities which are affected. This is a report about experiences in Nepal, where we, for example, could see that when communities were affected by climate change, there were no money available, there were no support, and they had to take loans, usually from other people in the communities, meaning that the economic effects for people for many years after the event became quite difficult. This kind of findings are important also so that we can improve our way of responding and improve our considerations when we develop projects relating to loss and damage. This is another study from Kenya where we clearly could see also the non-economic loss, which, to be honest, we were not so good at finding in the beginning, because as a traditional humanitarian NGO, we responded to the immediate need. But the more we learn about loss and damage, the better we are also at addressing the non-economic losses. For example, this study shows how pastoralist communities in Kenya are losing their tradition, their possibilities to live as pastoralists, because their cattle is dying because of droughts. So instead, they have to settle down and start a new way of living. And that has some really big non-economic effects also relating to culture and their history and language and so on. So what are the experiences from our monitoring and from this marker? Firstly, as I also mentioned, our projects are often integrating loss and damage and adaptation. And this is quite important, actually. Of course, we think that it's important to have two different categories, but we also think that it's important to combine them when we work on the ground, so that we ensure that efforts to address loss and damage also help us to prevent future loss and damage. Another experience is that it's quite difficult with attribution. When is a storm climate related, and when is it just a usual tropical storm? This is where science is so important. We need to learn more about the effects of climate change and how climate change is affecting the developments we see in the world. Because it's not always only the natural nature-based effects. There are also economic effects, as Adasena mentioned as well. We should also we can also learn from our monitoring that many of the loss and damage projects we are implementing, and many of a lot of the loss and damage we see together with our partners on the ground, it's taking place in conflict-prone contexts. And this makes it difficult because there are many factors contributing to the conflicts. And the challenge with the conflicts is that if you implement efforts to address loss and damage, you may contribute to the conflict if you're not doing it in a good way. So one of the lessons we have learned from this monitoring is that when we are working with loss and damage, we always need to have a conflict-sensitive approach. We need to make sure that our efforts are not contributing to the conflicts. And this is an important lesson which we would not have got if we did not have the monitoring where we could actually learn. And there are also some considerations for how we move forward. Some of the existing financial instruments are good, but there is a big funding gap. We can see that many of the loss and damage projects where we manage to address non-economic loss, for example, that's when we have our own funding, money we have collected from donations and money which we can use as we want, because when we apply for project funding, there are usually limits for how we can spend this money, and usually we cannot spend them on, for example, non-economic loss or slow onset disasters. So there is a funding gap, and there is a challenge to get the funding to address many of the losses and the damages we see. And this is because of the instruments are often not focused on climate change or loss and damage. A lot of the funding we use to address loss and damage, it's more humanitarian funding or traditional ODA, and not the climate finance where there are some limitations sometimes so that we can't use them for loss and damage. And then we should remember that there is still a lot to learn, and there are loss and damage which is outside our scope. And for example, when we look at small island states where the whole economy is affected, where the cost of capital is going up because of the risks for sea level rise, the effects of sea level rise on the small islands. This is a macroeconomic effect, a macroeconomic loss and damage, and that's beyond what we can deal with as an NGO. But still, it's important to understand more to see how our projects at least can contribute to the bigger efforts to address loss and damage. And final slide here. Some recommendations for the governments and for the UN climate negotiations. We need to distinguish between adaptation, loss and damage finance, because they are separate entities. Adaptation is the money we spend on preparing for the events, where loss and damage finance is spent on activities during and after the events. But at the same time, we also need to strengthen the synergy between loss and damage and adaptation on the ground. So it's important to have the lessons about the two approaches and see how they can be combined. We are aware attribution is difficult, but this should not hinder response. It would be so unfortunate if loss and damage action is hindered or delayed because scientists need to check if the typhoon was a climate-related typhoon or just an ordinary typhoon. That's not how it should be. Loss and damage finance must be flexible in that way so that it's not hindered by the attribution discussion. Localization makes a difference. The effects of climate change, the loss and damage is experienced on the ground. So it's really important also to have the local ownership and the local engagement. And this is also a question about access to finance for communities. Conflict sensitivity, as I mentioned, really needs to be integrated in the loss and damage approach. Same with gender responsiveness. We can see in our programs, in our monitoring, that gender women are often not receiving the assistance in the same degree as men, and this must be considered. And finally, the non-economic loss and damage needs to be addressed, and this is something where we need to continue to learn because it's a much bigger issue. Yeah, I'll stop there because I really hope that we also have time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthias. That was a really insightful information, and I hope the participants would like to jump into the discussions. Let me see. All right, so I guess we can try to answer this one from Adani Putri. You can see in the chat column. that Indonesia has been active in accessing international climate finance, particularly for adaptation and mitigation. However, funding specifically aimed at addressing loss and damage remains limited. Local actors, especially at the community level, often face significant challenges in accessing such funds directly. Additionally, the distinction between adaptation and loss and damage is frequently blurred in budgeting frameworks, both at national and subnational levels. Given your experience working directly with local communities in Nepal, Cambodia, or other regions facing similar climate vulnerabilities, what do you see as the main barriers for local actors in accessing loss and damage related finance? And how might these challenges be addressed? I guess that's a really need a long answer, but if you can make it short, that would be nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 points. As I mentioned, some of the best types of loss and damage finance we have, that's the money we collect, we get as donations in the global north. So it's people donating money to us because they know that we will address loss and damage in the global south. But this is difficult for local communities in Indonesia to access because it's money we collect in the global north. So it's really the collaboration between organizations like us and communities in the global south, which is so important. But even more important, of course, it's the government funding, the international climate finance, which is mobilized, that we need to create windows for loss and damage. And as you may know, there is now a fund for responding to loss and damage, which has been a result of negotiations in the UN climate talks, where Indonesia and other Asian countries have really played an important role in pushing this forward. Hopefully, this fund will have great access for local communities. This is at least something we are arguing for, so that it also become accessible for local level. But there are many challenges. The world is big. There are many local communities around the world, and there will be big competition to access these funds. So our call would be that more donors, more of the funds, both the bilateral funding but also international funding, is starting to be allocated for loss and damage, and that there are windows for local communities to access this funding. So that's an advocacy work we are engaging in, and I hope others are joining us in that effort.
That's our hope for us, yeah. So hopefully that answered the question from Mbak Adani Putri. Yeah. So if yes, then perhaps I would ask the other two speakers to provide short comments or questions because Matthias only have 10 minutes. Maybe start with Pak Sena if you have a comment very briefly.
To the question, sorry.
Yeah, or to the presentation of Pak Matthias.
Oh yeah, maybe to Pak Matthias, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. How do you see this issue of loss and damage going forward, especially for countries in Southeast Asia?
Thank you. Really good question. We have negotiations coming up next week, actually, in the UN, and the next summit will be in Brazil in November. I'm very worried because loss and damage is not really on the agenda. It's there are some discussions, but it's the discussion about loss and damage finance is missing, and it is a concern we are raising. I hope it's also a concern Indonesia is raising. It is important to continue the discussions about loss and damage finance because it's not enough just to create a fund unless there is funding. So there must be money allocated from countries in the global north. Hopefully, we will also get some kind of international funding mechanisms which can ensure more sustainable funding for loss and damage. We have the UN process to enable this kind of global solutions. And I really hope that the negotiations will deliver some results which also benefit people on the ground.
Okay, thank you very much. Pak Doha?
Yes, thank you, Matthias. This is excellent, very good presentation, and you left few things for me to discuss, so it's a good thing. My concern is that when we talk about loss and damage financing, then initially we talked about compensation, then obligatory financing from the developed countries, huge amount of funding for addressing both economic and non-economic loss and damages. But the fund that has been established and renamed as responding to loss and damage, fund for responding to loss and damage. So this is a very neutralized, narrative of developing that fund. Voluntary contribution, no targets. Even I think there is no requirement of attributing climate change because there is no concern of creating pressure on the developed countries to provide fund that to that fund. Given that context, I find a strong linkage between, uh, loss and damage and humanitarian support. And I guess most of the humanitarian support will be tagged as loss and damage fund. But the problem is that there is no coordination between two school of thoughts. If I consider UNFCCC and the UN DRR, Sendai framework, if I consider the experts and intellectual works in two different schools, even there is a huge gap. Even in ministries that work on in two different stream. But there is a scope for broadening up the scope of humanitarian support. This is just not, providing some relief and short-term rehabilitation, but also ensure long-term support beyond the scope of relief, how to diversify development, livelihood development, how to address displacement and migration, how to address child marriage, child labor, the other things. So how do you think that there is a scope or possibility to broaden up the scope of humanitarian support because you are leading an organization that is focusing on humanitarian activities. So if there is any scope to broaden up and how we could do this jointly.
Thank you. Really good point, and really relevant to the work both as for us as humanitarian organization and for the climate talks. I agree. Basically there is a compensation imperative when we talk about loss and damage. In reality, looking at just mobilizing funding, we are using some of the humanitarian funds to address loss and damage because we don't want to wait for the discussion about responsibility to be finalized. That will take a lot of time because parties are not agreeing in the UN. So meanwhile, let's use the money we can access. In the humanitarian funds and the humanitarian funding, there is a challenge that they are not geared, they're not prepared for addressing loss and damage because many of them lack the possibility to address non-economic losses. They lack the possibility to reconstruct, to resettle. They lack the possibility to address the slow onset disasters. Now, though you come from Bangladesh, I know you're also concerned about the slow onset
Yes.
disasters, and this is not considered a humanitarian need. So there are some big gaps in the humanitarian funding. What we try to do as humanitarian actor is also to talk with the humanitarian system. We are also engaged in dialogue with many of the humanitarian actors to promote loss and damage and to ensure that there's better understanding among those working with humanitarian activities about the effects of climate change so that the funding mechanisms can be adjusted and also support, for example, slow onset disasters. And it's an ongoing discussions within the humanitarian sector, which is needed. I also talk with my colleagues in DCA, and we have an internal discussion about how to integrate adaptation, loss and damage, and humanitarian aid.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have one more from the participant from Ania. I'm interested in the non-financial loss. It was mentioned about the animal husbandry in Sudan. Is it a livelihood as well as a culture? And is there any way to non-financial to the financial? Um, I hope the
Yeah,
question makes
yeah.
sense. Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. In Kenya, I think it was the example I used. there are pastoralists, so people living with their animals or living as herds. They can no longer live in that way. Their way of living is interrupted by climate change. They are facing a loss and damage. Their animals are dying. They have to settle down. Uh, what we do is to help them to find new ways of working. Some of them get the training to be fishermen instead. Uh, Fishermen, they live in one place. They are not moving around with their animals. So there is a cultural change. And there is also a bigger cultural change because in the pastoralist community, it's a question of status to have many animals. It's if you have many animals, you're rich. If you have no animals, and if you work as a fisherman, what's your status then? So there are some big non-economic questions coming up, and these must also be addressed. And we clearly need to improve our way of working with non-economic loss together with our partners on the ground, because this is it's also a question about rights and the right to have a culture and to have a history. So it is an area where we need to improve, we need to learn, and this is why this marker is good, because without the marker, it's difficult to find the projects. Now we can just look in all our portfolio and identify all the loss and damage projects and start to monitor them more closely and to learn and improve.
Well, thank you so much, Matthias. It's 3 p.m. right now, so I guess you need to leave. Although we have one question from the participant right now. If you can spare like 1-2 minutes to answer it through chat, like by writing, that would be great because we have to move on.
So that
Yes, all right. Thank you so much. Okay,
you.
Bapak Ibu, thank you so much. So keep writing the questions for Pak Sena and Pak Doha later, because after this I will going to invite Pak Doha, Muhammad Shamsudoha from Bangladesh. He is the chief executive of CPRD in Bangladesh, and he has been a key voice in climate policy for over a decade, especially in issues of loss and damage. And he'll be speaking on how the needs and priorities of developing countries can be better reflected in climate finance and planning. Mr. Doha, you have 15 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a very good discussion, and I think most of the issues has been covered by Matthias, and because the issues are almost similar. Continuing discussion where Matthias left, it's a kind of establishing theoretical understanding uh, to establish a nexus between climate change and also climate change-induced loss and damages. And in earlier presentation, we found that the global temperature has been increasing. It already crossed 1.5 degrees Celsius, and it also causing, I mean, greenhouse gas emission reduction more difficult and also expensive, and also leading to adaptation gap. When we are in a situation of adaptation gap and failure, then the third scenario comes. This is loss and damage. And when we talk about loss and damage, in most of the cases, we focus on the primary impacts of climate change. So primary impacts of climate change is of, am I audible completely?
Hi, yes, if you can like make your presentation in full screen, that would be great. Whereas you can check down right downside of in the bar, right down at the bottom.
Right down,
Bottom right, there is an option to make it full screen. I think that's it. I
Yes.
believe.
Okay.
Yes, there you go.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I also opened my video. I forgot this. Anyway, so when we talk about, loss and damage, we often talk about primary impacts of climate change, which is related to flood, cyclone, riverbank erosion, and that causes economic loss and damage. So the entire discussion of loss and damage is primarily currently around economic loss and damages. But the economic loss and damages, there is also another chapter, we call it non-economic loss and damages. In most of the cases, non-economic losses are the secondary and tertiary impacts of climate change. And often we say that they are the residual impact of primary impacts. For instance, One primary impact, cyclone or flood, they causes, displacement and migration. But when a family migrates from one place to another place, there is a consequences on dropout from school, increase of child labor, and increase of child marriage. So this is the consequences of the primary impacts of climate change extended to secondary risk level. Again, secondary risk level is extended to the tertiary risk level, which is involuntary migration, gender-based violence, human rights violation, poverty, inequality. So it's an impact chain, but unfortunately, we only focus on the economic loss and damages, and which is around, primary impacts of climate change. We often forget the other parts of loss and damages, which is non-economic loss and damages, and which is related to the human dimension of climate change impact. So my concern is that we also should focus on the human dimension of climate change impact, not only the some economic loss and damages. We implemented a study in a river-bank eroded communities. There was a huge displacement from a big river basin in Bangladesh, and we found that the number and amount of non-economic loss and damages is much more higher than the economic loss and damages. So if I count the economic loss and damages, they are the loss of homestead, loss of crops and livestock, damages of infrastructure, loss of agricultural land. But on the other hand, the non-economic loss and damages extended to the secondary and tertiary risk level. They are the shifting to undignified occupation, because due to riverbank erosion, many communities are forced to migrate to the urban areas for their livelihoods. And they start pulling rickshaws, household maid, or begging, and also doing other undignified job in informal sectors. So this is the kind of non-economic loss and damages, and this is uncounted, unresearched, unpublished. There are huge number of dropout from school, and we also have documented a number of children that faced early marriage. There is also psychological trauma due to loss of, household, agricultural lands. There is also loss of social identity, because when a community or family displaced from one place to another place or migrate to the urban areas, then that community faces loss of social identity. That also causes of, loss of religious structure, social infrastructure, and also culture. So these are the non-economic loss and damages, and are ignored but in the climate change discourse and also policy framing. So this is a kind of negotiation that went on throughout the history of climate change discussion since 1991 or 1992 to 2024, in terms of establishing loss and damage in the climate change discourse. If I make it short, the discussion initially started demanding compensation from the developed countries that for the permanent economic loss. For instance, the small island developing countries started to argue that if sea level rise causes, then they might lose their territory, habitat, and they lost their entire country, state, or economics. So that loss should be compensated. Starting from the compensation discussion, we lost the demand of compensation because the loss and damage was not a dear agenda in the climate change discourses. Hence, to make it an agenda item, the developing countries traded off their compensation demand instead of having a standalone agenda item at the UNFCCC discussion. So going forward, we have established Santiago Network for loss and damage in 2019, and we also got an standalone agenda item, Article 8, at the Paris Agreement. And after that, the discussion, went on demanding to establish a fund for addressing loss and damages. But the entire discussion, we lost many important items and agendas. One is we lost the demand for compensation. We lost also establishing a separate agenda item for addressing climate change induced displacement and migration. Good thing is that we established a funding mechanism under the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement for addressing loss and damage. But the funding is not that robust. The funding has not any political support to compensate climate change induced loss and damages. So these are the two basic stream of of loss and damages under the UNFCCC and also the Paris Agreement. If you look at the lower part of the slide, it is at COP28 in 2023. A fund has been established to responding and to addressing loss and damage. So responding to loss and damage is very important, because when you talk about responding to loss and damage, this is indicates humanitarian response. I mean, what usually we do after a disaster happened. And currently at that fund, we have around 768 million pledged fund. I mean, it's a kind of not commitment. It's a kind of uh, pledged by the developed countries. And so far, the fund received only USD 321 million. And there is a discussion at the fund board that that 250 million fund will be disbursed as a priority basis, and 50% will go to the developing countries, and also 50% will go to the small and developing states, and also to the LDCs. And a secretariat also has been established for look after this fund. A secretariat is based in the Philippines, and the secretariat is housed at the World Bank. And World Bank will look after all the fiduciary risk management, monitoring, accounting, and all the other things. So that fund has been established since a long struggle at the UNFCCC, but without having any substantial amount to that fund. If I look into the scope of loss and damage fund, there are three different scope. One is responding. As I said earlier, responding is related to humanitarian support, and addressing loss and damage. Often we talk about that addressing is a kind of activities before a disaster happens. I mean, to reduce loss and damages. Again, the scope has been categorized into three different aspects. One is averting loss and damage. This is clearly linked to mitigation. If we could limit global average temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, then we can avoid substantial amount of loss and damages. Again, responding to loss and damage, this is minimizing loss and damage. So if we do adaptation activities, if we do some kind of ex-ante disaster risk reduction, risk transfer measures, early warning system, and also social safety net, then we can minimize substantial amount of loss and damages. Then addressing loss and damage. So addressing loss and damage means if we do averting and also minimizing, still there will have some loss and damages when a disaster happens. And that loss and damages could be addressed with humanitarian support or any kind of funding mechanism. Thing is that loss and damage fund, I mean, crosses all the elements of climate change negotiation. It's linked to mitigation, it's linked to adaptation, and again, it's linked to humanitarian support. So there's the, I mean, complexity of loss and damage fund. But again, if I consider the global aspect, in globally there are two different policy dimension. I tried to clarify some issues when I ask Matthias, because Matthias is doing a kind of work in global level. Under the UNFCCC, we have Paris Agreement, we have FUIM, we have Loss and Damage Fund, but though this is voluntary contribution and linked to humanitarian support. But again, under the UN TRR Sendai framework, we also have, there is also a mandate to support countries when a disaster happened with humanitarian assistance. But there is no coordination among two different global platform and also global policies. But on the ground, we cannot differentiate. I mean, loss and damage, we cannot differentiate with adaptation and with other humanitarian support. But on the ground, we can do a common comprehensive activities so that we can do comprehensive activities to reduce loss and damage, to address loss and damage, and to support rehabilitation and also relief to the community level. So there is a national scope to establish and develop comprehensive plan, not only to address loss and damage, but also how to minimize loss and damage with comprehensive program activities. But there is a problem with the current scope of addressing loss and damage. The current scope of addressing loss and damage, if I consider in Bangladesh, is related to the Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief, and this is very short term. And it's only the NGOs. I mean, in Bangladesh, we have many NGOs, microfinance NGOs, and other NGOs. They're the first responder to disaster losses with food, water, and emergency medical assistance, but with very minimum support and very short-term support, small support. And they only consider the primary impacts of climate change. As I talked to you earlier, that when we talk about loss and damage, this is not only the primary impacts of climate change, this is not only the economic loss and damages. There are a range of non-economic loss and damages: displacement of migration, dropout from school, gender-based violence, early marriage. So the entire scenario of non-economic loss and damages are missed out or have been missing from the financial scope of addressing loss and damage, whether this is for adaptation, whether this is for humanitarian support. Now, challenge, if I consider the national issues and how a national government or local government authorities could address loss and damage issues, there are some challenge. One is how to differentiate loss and damage from adaptation and humanitarian support. And if go to the presentation of Matthias. Matthias is trying to develop a marker, but still globally, when we receive fund from development partners, even from the bilateral fundings, the adaptation fund has been named as loss and damage fund. Uh, Funding for disaster risk reduction or humanitarian support is also uh, tagged as loss and damage funds. So there is an issue of the unaccountability and transparency in the entire discourse of loss and damage mechanism and loss and damage funding. But this is important, and this is obviously necessary to make a difference between loss and damage funding and also humanitarian funding. And I think national government should develop a kind of uh, budget line or tracking system to make those two things separated: adaptation, loss and damage, and humanitarian support. In planning discourses, we have developed national adaptation plan for adaptation activities. We also have DRR plans, but we don't have any plans for addressing loss and damage. So countries should have a standalone plan, maybe with some cross-cutting issues with the adaptation activities and also the humanitarian support. But countries should have a plan or strategies to address loss and damage fund, and countries also should make a solid account on the loss and damages. What are the sectors that will be facing substantial amount of loss and damages due to current and also future climate change? But for instance, if I consider Bangladesh, the agriculture sector, fisheries sector, and also infrastructure, we will face economic loss and damages. If I consider the non-economic loss and damages, this is health. This is also the other human rights issues. Settlements and also education, gender issues, they will face non-economic loss and damages. So a kind of solid accounting or baseline should be established by the national government so that they can make a clear argument to the international level for mobilizing fund for addressing those challenges.
Pak Doha, you have
Yes.
4 minutes.
Okay. The challenge too is establish research-based evidences of non-economic loss and damages. So when you talk about climate change, we all consider economic loss and damages. If I consider any disaster event, we all consider the what amount we lost due to that cyclone or riverbank erosion or floods. We really need to establish science-based narrative on non-economic loss and damages. Problem is that the global finances for research is very minimum, and we also don't have in-depth research facilities to understand the human dimension of climate change impact. And this is very much related to the social dimension, social research. So unless implementing those research, we cannot make a linkage that the secondary and tertiary impacts of climate change has a clear link with the impacts of climate change, climate science. So without establishing climate science to the secondary and tertiary risk level, we cannot develop a proper projects and a solid argument for funding. We also can establish a new dimension on human rights obligation, because many of the impacts of climate change, particularly non-economic loss and damages, are affecting the human rights obligations. So if we make a clear linkages with the human rights obligation and climate change impact, we can also broaden up the scope, not only under the UNFCCC, but also other international arena to make our demand more stronger. The third challenge is that weak institutional arrangement and coordination. I think this is common in all countries. In Bangladesh, this is Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and the focal ministry for addressing or negotiating climate change. And on the other hand, Ministry of Disaster Management and Relief is responsible for disaster relief and other activities. But there is a strong policy gap, coordination gap between two ministries. The recommendation is that countries should establish an intersectoral, not only particular sector, the sector that will be affecting by the impacts of climate change and will facing more loss and damages, and also the interministerial platform to understand the loss and damages and can make a national plan for addressing those loss and damages. We also need to strengthen capacities, CSOs, who have substantial experiences in grassroots level for implementing post-disaster relief and rehabilitation activities so that they also can include loss and damages to their planning and program. If I consider the scales, there are many different scales, individual or household, community, national, regional, and global. If I consider the individual and household level, we have many different options to support communities, household, to sustain loss and damages and other economic activity losses. This is microfinance, micro savings, micro insurance, and others. So we need to blend those elements with the loss and damage funding structure nationally and internationally. We also should look into the global insurance, group savings, community level risk management fund. In national level, we also can broaden up the social protection measures and also, risk transfer initiatives so that they can establish a kind of market mechanism to support the communities to recover or to transfer climate change induced loss and damages. But we need to be smart. Not just talking about, we need to make a proper blending of social protection with anticipatory action. We need to really focus on risk reduction, risk transfer initiative, and we need to develop long-term rehabilitation for rehabilitating loss and damages. And those three things should be included to the national adaptation and DRS strategies, or national adaptation and DRS strategies should be linked to the national loss and damage mechanism with all three different elements. I'd like to stop here. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Badoha. So I think we have 10 minutes for question and answer. The organizer has helped me to pick one for each. So if we have more time later, it depends on how long the discussion would be. Then we can choose another questions. First for Pa Sena, regarding the monitoring tools, how accurate are the data in representing the actual conditions in a certain area? And for example, considering how fast a district in Indonesia, rainfall measurements can vary between the station and other nearby locations within the same districts, for example. So this can significantly affect the accuracy of measuring the river flow rate in the district. What are the strategies from BMKG to address this gap?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. First of all, actually, the design of weather and climate monitoring in BMKG serves a specific purpose for monitoring weather and climate. As the question here is actually more directed towards a specific use for water monitoring in a river basin scale. Not all of the ground measurement in BMKG are actually tailored towards the needs of all sectors. So if Pak Naufal here is referring to a use case for the water sectors, then I think for those specific water river basin that are being examined or being used, it had to be installed a specific observation within the appropriate scale of that river basin. Despite there is usually already a surrounding that a certain area measurements from BMKG. For instance, historical data is needed for the purpose of a design, for instance, we can always use the best approach of blending historical in situ or ground-based measurements with satellite data, for instance, that is serving quite, I would say, quite a quite good approach in estimating the historical rainfall. But in any case of the concern of any use case, the as the measurement that are being placed in the ground or in situ have also disadvantages. A satellite or a remote sensing based observation have their own advantages as well as disadvantages. But in terms of making application, I think there is a strong push now that we don't have to wait for a perfect information. We can tailor application for any sector, water, health, forestry, name it, with acceptable levels of accuracy as well as acceptable level of uncertainty to push a benefit of the historical measurements that are being taken by BMKG or also other government authorities such as the Ministry of Public Works. Thanks.
Thank you, Pak Sena. And then the second one for Pak Doha. I'm sorry, I have to rush this because we don't have that much time anymore. For Pak Doha, the progress on the loss and damage funding arrangement is very compelling, with the substantial financial pledges currently amounting to 768 million US dollars, which 321 million has been received. I was wondering, and perhaps I may have missed your speech, if there are already established mechanisms or frameworks in place to assess and evaluate the effectiveness and accountability of the funds disbursement, as well as its actual impact on vulnerable communities. Also, how will transparency and equitable allocation be ensured across recipient countries?
Oh, thank you very much. And this is a total untransparent method, I should say, because the pledged amount is 700 and there is no new commitment to that fund. They delivered only 351, and there was a huge pressure from the seeds and also LDCs to channel those funded to the climate change affected communities. They also have established a secretariat, and there is a cost for running the secretariat. So a significant amount of the money is spent on secretariat. But again, there is a decision in the last board meeting that 250 million money will be directly dispersed to the countries, climate vulnerable countries, and 50% will go to the small island developing states and LDCs. But there is no mechanism how that money will reach to the climate change affected communities, climate change vulnerable communities. And I think, and I assume, and this is maybe not I mean false assumption, that the fund will follow the existing structure and mechanism. When you talk about the existing structure, they will follow they will try to channel this fund to the state nominated agencies. For instance, there are NIEs and also DAEs, MIEs to access adaptation fund and also green climate fund. So the same DAEs, I mean direct access entities, and also same MIs, multilateral implementing entities, will access this fund according to their proposal and will ensure project implementation in the communities. So there is no community ownership on that fund. There is no issues that community try to communicate to those funds. So if you consider the monitoring system, if you consider the transparency accountability, I don't see any robust transparency mechanism to track this result.
Okay, thank you. And one more, if we have time for both speakers to answer these cross-cutting questions from Mbak Juliani. As highlighted in both of your presentations, The current practices in addressing loss and damage are still highly fragmented, limited to short-term economic responses, often decided politically, and with little attention to non-economic impacts. Meanwhile, institutional coordination, research-based evidence, and financial accessibility remain major challenges. In countries like Indonesia, where climate risks often intersect with social vulnerabilities and weak governance capacity, how can we move toward a more integrated national framework that recognizes the full spectrum of loss and damage, from anticipatory actions to long-term rehabilitations, from economic to non-economic impacts, while ensuring the participation of local communities and alignment with global mechanisms like the Santiago Network and FRLD. So this is maybe 2 pages answer, but if we can make it in 3 to 5 minutes, that would be great. Who wants to answer first, Pak Doha or Pak Sena? Pak Sena
Okay,
or Pak Doha? Okay,
as
okay.
this is related to he's science guy. I mean, so this is related to loss and damage funding and others. So I would like to respond. The thing is that the adaptation and also other climate change project, they still consider the primary impact. And primary impact is risks-based narrative. We need to go for comprehensive vulnerability assessment. This is not only risk, but also adaptive capacity and also incapability to adapt. So if we understand the incapability of adaptation to adapt and also capability to adapt, then we can understand the whole scenario of vulnerability through a bottom-up vulnerability assessment process. So once we have the vulnerability assessment from the communities, from the sectors, we can identify both economic loss and damage and non-economic loss and damages. This is first concern. So this is first. Second is that when we do research, often we do research to understand the, again, primary impact. We often fail to uh, go show to the impact chain, how the primary impact is causing the non-economic loss and damages extended to the secondary and tertiary risk level. So we need to make a research-based narrative on the extension of climate change impact to the non-economic level. Third is that there is a strong policy and coordination gap in all the countries, particularly in Bangladesh, maybe in Indonesia. Ministries, sectors, departments, even experts, they work in isolation. So we need to hook on the planning ministry in Bangladesh, because if I consider the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, this is based in Ministry of Finance. So if the planning ministry take the lead and also, influence or talk to the other ministries who will be experiencing the loss and damages, then those ministries in particular can develop their own plan. How Ministry of Health will face loss and damage in terms of health. How Ministry of Education will face loss and damage in terms of school education and also dropout from school. So if the ministries develop their own plan on loss and damages and compile them to a comprehensive plan or national strategy and led by the Ministry of Planning, that will establish a kind of coordination within the national system. Again, there is also a coordination in the international level. How the UNFCCC and the UNDRR, Sendai Framework, and also the Paris Agreement can work together to identify the opportunities of addressing loss and damages. So I think we need coordination not only from national level, but also at the international level.
Okay, thank you, Pak Doha. Pak Sena?
Yes, thank you. Maybe to complement the excellent intervention made by Pak Doha now. What we actually also try within our role in BMKG, so we try to complement the top-down approach from national provinces, kabupaten, etc. We for the past years we try to work directly with the sectors that are being impacted actually on the ground, and that is showing actually more uh, uh, more results. The services that we give are easily taken up by the sectors because they deal immediately with the impact at hand on a daily basis. And that kind of situation is very different if we continue to try to use the idealistic top-down approach and assuming that if we have things sorted out at the national level, then it will go automatically towards the district or provincial level. That is almost always not the case. So if we try to continue to work that way while it doesn't show significant impact throughout the years, then why should we only try that way? So what we try in BMKG is to work with, for instance, the health sector, the agriculture sectors, the farmers that are impacted by climate change in the grassroots level, and it is actually quite fruitful and quite promising. So that is just an alternative way how we see the very top level view of the question from Mbak Julia here. So she could make a dissertation out of her question.
There you go. I was about to suggest the same. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are towards the end of the webinar, but please don't forget to fill out the survey through the link in the chat box so that we can record your email and you can receive the materials. And don't go, don't go out yet because we're about to take a picture together while you're, I don't know, like fixing your hair and stuff. And turn your camera on so we can all have a great picture together. I would like to just briefly recapitulate what have been discussed today. Pak Sena showed us the recent climate trends in Asia and how they call for climate-informed risk planning. Pak Matthias introduced us to the practical tools for tracking loss and damage interventions through the marker. And Pak Doha reminded us of the systemic gaps in responding to the needs of vulnerable communities and how policy and finance must evolve. A lot of challenges, systemic one, non-systemic one, but efforts are being made, progress are being achieved, however small it is. That should be enough to keep us going. And hopefully we can do better in recognizing all the vulnerability and loss and damage and make interventions towards that. All right. So thank you very much for that. So maybe the organizer can guide us to make the picture together. Yes, Bapak Ibu, smile yang cantik. Okay, so should I count? 1, 2, 3, and then all smile, yeah? And then hold the smile.
So,
Okay.
sorry. So our committee will be taking pictures of.
Yeah. Are we taking picture of all the participants, right? Yes. Okay. All right. I will count 1, 2, 3, and then everybody else hold the smile for 1 hour. Oh no, 30 seconds. All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Hold the breath. Is it good? Do y'all get it? Because I bet this is like several pages, right? Please let us know if we can like release the smile. Okay, I think we're good. Alrighty. Don't forget, Bapak Ibu, write your email in the link in the chat box so that we can have your email. And thank you so much for all the speakers, Pak Ardasena, Pak Doha, and also Pak Matthias who already left. A really great insight for you, and thank you so much for sharing it with us all here. And also thank you for the audience, Bapak Ibu, coming from all over the world. Hopefully this is meaningful and substantial for you. And see you next time I'm Lia Zakia, the moderator. Really thank you for all the discussions today. Bye.